On the show today, I have Juan Miguel Goyzueta. He's an economic analyst in Spain, and he's here to talk to us about the current situation there. Hi, Juan. How are you?
Hello, I'm fine here at home now.
Okay, good. So, what's the situation there in Spain? What part of Spain do you live in, by the way?
In Madrid, which it happens to be just the epicenter of the pandemic in Spain now. But things have improved over the last few weeks. There are less and less cases every day, and of course, less and less deaths. So that's a good evolution over the last couple of weeks, but we'd still look up to another month of total lockdown here.
Okay, and have you known people personally who have died, who have gotten the coronavirus or COVID-19?
Well, actually, yes. Unfortunately, yes, because I had in my company uh, we had some foreign language classes, and there was an English language teacher which arrived like every 15 days, every other week. And I actually didn't know him well because I didn't take classes with him, but I just saw him coming and going out of the office. And just last week, I got the news that apparently he died.
Oh, wow.
So,
How old was he?
but well, I don't know, but he was probably in his 50s, I think.
And what country was he from? Was he from Spain, or he was taking
No, he
classes?
was a Canadian.
Oh, was Canadian. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's unfortunate. Yeah. So I guess you did because there's a lot of people out there they're saying that it's fake or that the it's exaggerated. What do you think about that from your perspective there in Spain? Do you think it's like the seasonal flu, maybe just a little bit worse, or do you really believe it's something that as an economic analyst, you think the economy should be shut down for?
Well, it's definitely not the flu, but the thing about the coronavirus is that the effects on different groups of people are very different. So it can be very risky for some people and not risky at all for other groups of people. So it's like even probably even less than the flu for very young and very healthy people, but it can be terrible if you happen to be have a pre-existing condition or something like that. Actually, could tell I am not sure if I already got the disease because like 2 or 3 weeks ago, just when the crisis got at its worst point, I had a kind of like a flu, but it was strange because I didn't have like a sore throat or anything like that, but I just got like a dry cough and a really small fever, which lasted like a couple days, and the cough lasted like 5 days, and I was pretty tired a couple days, like just sleeping the whole day. So of course
And
that
around
just
what
happened
time? Around what month did that happen to you?
in March.
Oh, in
That was
March.
in mid-March. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and of course, I was pretty exposed because here in Spain, people live outside the whole time. So I went to the gym. I talked to a lot of persons in the office and all that. So I was a pretty good candidate to catch it.
Right, right. But do you think that shutting down the economy is prudent, or do you think it should have been done more in a gradual way? And just like you just said right now, certain groups are affected more than others. Shouldn't it have been where someone who could potentially get more sick than others should be isolated, or should take more precautions instead of shutting down the entire economy? For example, if you're 21, you're healthy, and you work in an office, do you think you should stay home if you're really not at risk of developing any serious condition?
Well, actually, I think we are moving in that direction because all the rest of the damage, like the economic damage and the mental health issues that can arise from quarantine, these are they also grow exponentially. The damage to the economy, it's probably if you shut down the economy 1 week, It's nobody will notice. If you shut it down 1 month, everybody will notice, and it will be a pretty bad year. But if you shut it down like 6 months, it will be terrible. So the damage also grows exponentially. So I think the whole lockdown will last 2 months, and then we're gonna move to a gradual opening up. And of course, the people who are most at risk will still have to be will have to keep to themselves, and they will be much isolated from the rest of the world. As if it's worth to shut down the economy for 2 months. I think it is, because first of all, it is a pretty new virus. We don't know much about it, so if you just let the virus run unchecked through the population, you can either have tens of thousands of deaths or even millions of deaths. And we don't know much about the long-term consequences of these two. Everything indicates that it's not going to be such a serious disease as in terms of long-term consequences, but still it's something that we do not know. So it's better not to take the risk to let the pandemic run through the whole population. But I think when we hit the mark of 2 months of being shut down, then the other things are going to start weakening a little bit more.
But what do you think about, for example, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, said, "You can't let the cure be worse than the disease." A lot of people criticize him, and he's a very controversial president, obviously. But what do you think about that idea? And the idea by itself, you separate it from Donald Trump, who usually, like I said, is very controversial. The idea itself, though, the cure can't be worse than the disease, makes sense. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I agree with the basic idea, but of course, as I told you, there are trade-offs in this, which they exist whether people like them or not. So, in terms of the disease control, it's pretty aggressive what we're doing now. We're probably doing the most aggressive measures that have ever been taken, and that carries a huge price tag, but it might be worth it for the short term. But I don't see this as a medium-term solution. We have to move in other directions, because just because of what you are saying, because there are trade-offs. The economic damage will be huge if we stay locked in for 4, 5, 6 months. And that will, of course, cause a lot of deaths, a lot of desperation, a lot of poverty. Even in the US, which is a pretty rich country, I cannot imagine what will happen in other countries which are more vulnerable. And of course, not an economic issue, it's also a mental health issue, a family issue. So we're learning. The good news, I think, is that we are learning much more about this. I also think that the government reaction has been much faster, not just in the health part, but also in the economic part. Like the Federal Reserve, the Congress, we would have liked to have a reaction just as quick for the financial crisis of 2008. But this time it's much better. So I think that could help, but still.
The thing is, it's been said that people who want to get SBA loans, small business loans, are finding it very difficult to get them because of the regulation and you have to jump through all these hoops to get it, and the banks who are the ones creating these roadblocks is interesting. Were the ones who were bailed out in 2008, and people are pretty dissatisfied about that. What do you think about that?
No, I think the loans for small businesses should be readily available. The government should definitely fix that and prioritize business survival over credit worthiness. Of course, part of those loans are not going to be paid back, but the economy urgently needs liquidity. I think I have proposed, like in other settings, that part of the debt that's being created now should be paid via a tax on excess savings, because some businesses are really struggling at this time because they don't have any sales, but there are a whole lot of people and businesses that still get regular income. Like a huge part of the population, they keep their jobs and they are still getting paid every month, and they are not having expenses. I can see it here. Because you cannot spend your money, you just need to buy essential issues. So basically, your expenses have dropped by a huge amount, and that money, which should be circulating in the economy, is just piling up on the accounts of employees, on the accounts of creditors, and they don't really need that money now. So if I could design like the perfect type of response, I would make loans much more easily available for businesses who are struggling. And then on the second half of the year, I would institute an extraordinary tax on the businesses and the people who were not affected as much, on trying to capture like these excess savings that this situation
Right.
is generating.
I mean, I think something like that might work in Spain, but I don't think it would work in the United States. I don't think people would be very happy to get taxed for being prudent and saving their money and planning, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I don't mean on the back of that, but I mean on the excess savings that you are forced to do right now, and like this month, because your regular expenses should have dropped like 50% or more.
Right. And what do you think the future is like economically for Europe in whole? Do you think it's going to recover quickly? It's going to take a long time. What do you think? And what do you think the response has been in Europe? Do you give it a good grade or a bad grade?
Bad grade. I think the U.S. response has been better, even if it has not been perfect. I think here especially in Southern Europe, Spain and Italy has been the worst hit countries. I think Spain has the highest death rate in the world for coronavirus. And of course, I think the economic recovery will be much faster in the US because it's a much more flexible economy. The type of policies that they are putting up here in Spain are not good. They try to make freezing contracts so that companies cannot fire people, and that's the worst possible solution, because then you're not going to have employees that are fired, but you're going to have companies that go bankrupt. So instead of firing 100,000 people, they will fire 1,000,000 people.
Right.
And so I think Europe will have a hard time, especially Spain and Italy, because in Spain, 15% of GDP comes from tourism, and tourism is basically going to go to zero. So it's not very good. I think the economic recovery will be much faster in the U.S.
Okay. And what about rent there? Has rent been frozen?
That was another measure that the government was considering, like making rental agreements, like freezing them and preventing people who lost their job from being evicted. I think they still don't have approved that measure, but that's, I think, the direction they are going. Anyway, the rental market will drop now. In Spain was building up another housing bubble, basically because of tourism. Like over the last few years, the rent went very high here especially in Madrid and Barcelona, and now it's gonna drop hugely.
It's a good time to buy a home in Spain.
Yeah, probably, but you will have to wait like 5 or 10 years to make a good return, I think.
Okay. And like, what other subjects do you want to talk about that maybe I didn't cover that you think are important? 'Cause I have to go soon.
Well, I think another important topic is how this pandemic is gonna affect Africa, South America, Central America, because that's a huge issue, not just for those countries, but also in terms of allowing for international trade to resume after the most critical period. Because the ideal situation will be like the virus hits all countries at the same time. Everyone goes into lockdown, but then 2 or 3 months later, everybody goes out of lockdown, and it will be much easier to start again. But this has been travel. It began in China, then it moved to Europe, then to the US, and probably then it will go to Latin America and to Africa. So then we will have like 6 months or even a year where these outbreaks keep happening somewhere in the world.
I almost believe that there's a couple of scenarios that could take place. One is it keeps getting worse. Death count keeps rising, and there's civil unrest, and really bad things happen when there's civil unrest.
Yeah.
Scenario number two is numbers drop. We realize the models are wrong, and it's essentially, in terms of damage to the human body collectively, a severe flu, and everything reopens, and there's a big revival of a global economy. I mean, those are pretty much the two scenarios that I kind of see going. What do you think about that?
Yes, I also think those are the two extreme scenarios. There are some scenarios in between. The best news that we could get from this is like if suddenly they make antibody tests and they realize that 60 or 70% of the population has been infected, because that way
that would be great, because the numbers would be very low for mortality.
Yeah, of course, and then we would already have like a herd immunity.
Right.
So that will be like the best possible news. I think we would land somewhere in between. I think here in Spain, probably, if I had to take a guess, I would say like 25% of the population will have been infected by late May. So that's kind of a difficult number, because that's still pretty far away from herd immunity. So that would mean that we still could have another big outbreak if it runs loose. But they would still. But that will mean that if they manage the flow correctly, then over a couple of months they could get pretty close to herd immunity, especially protecting, as you said before, like vulnerable people and that stuff. I think in the U.S. you will land pretty close to that too.
Right. Okay. Juan Miguel Goyzueta. He's a economist and an analyst. Where can people find out more information about you and your work?
Well, I have a personal blog in a Guatemala newspaper that's called Plaza Pública, so you can look me up in Google. Just put Juan Miguel Goyzueta with a Y and a Z, and you will find out about me.
Okay, thank you.
Or on my Twitter page too. It's Juan Miguel Goyzueta.
Okay, thank you for joining the show, Juan.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Take care.
You too. Bye.